This is Friday evening's Undercard. On our wrestling show today, Bobby Heenan serves gourmet food, the Killer Bees do a swap, and Gene Okerlund calls Bobby Heenan a jabroni. Welcome everyone to this episode of Friday Evening's Undercard. I'm Gentleman John, I'm your host, and due to some audio issues, I got to go solo this week. Eric and I tried to get together last week, and we did, but when I got to the end of the recording, it has some terrible background noise. Almost sounds like a siren off of a fire engine or something, just through the entire recording, and it's just not usable. I'm not going to put something like that out because nobody's going to listen to it, and it's just going to be terrible. It makes us sound terrible and everything else. So you just get me. No Eric on this one, so I'm going solo. We're on the April 13th, 1987 episode of Primetime Wrestling. Episode starts off, you get the opening montage with Monsoon and Heenan. Bobby Heenan says he has some fine Chinese food sitting in the microwave, keeping it warm. Just great Heenan stuff. Him and Monsoon, it works really well because this is the thing they've been hinting at for a couple of weeks. So they're going to have this big feast or whatever it is. And so he says he's got Chinese food sitting in the microwave. We go into the first match. It's the Hart Foundation against the Rougeau brothers for the Tag Team Championships. This match is from March 7th, 1987, Boston Garden. And they announce that it's one fall and a 1 hour time limit. Again, we've discussed it a few times on the show. The time limit thing is really weird because we almost never see that nowadays. You hardly ever see a time limit. So it's interesting to see that going back through these shows. Funny line from Monsoon as they're going through. It says, "Look at the legs on the mouth of the South. He should be suing somebody for lack of support." Obviously talking about Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart's just a tiny guy. It works great for a manager, though, being that small. And obviously this episode, or this match, is still one of the taped matches from before WrestleMania 3. And so as they go through it on the commentary, they're still talking about the Jimmy Hart, Alice Cooper feud during the Honky Tonk Man, Jake Roberts match as something that's going to be happening in the future. As they start the match off, Brett goes and hides over in the ropes couple times. Good heel work. He's trying not to be right in the match because he doesn't want to be a part of it, doesn't really want to mix it up, which is weird because we saw Brett with such a long babyface run where he would really go after people. Do an interesting knuckle lock to start. That's something you never see anymore. You never see a knuckle lock anymore. Then he kicks Jacques right in the gut. And then, Brett rolls out of the ring after Jacques makes his little comeback. Really, really slow start to this match. Bret Hart goes for a body slam. He's going at it really slow. It's kind of strange looking. Misses an elbow drop. Ramon Rougeau goes for a great arm drag and takes it straight into an arm bar. And Monsoon, with one of his standard Monsoonisms or whatever you want to call it, says that he's working over the lateral collateral ligaments. Always great Monsoon when he starts trying to give you all the medical terminology, and he never gets it right. But it's interesting to hear him, talking like that. They note that the non-title match that we saw last week on Primetime Wrestling was last month in Boston, because Boston, as with most WWF towns during this time, at least the big ones, was a monthly town. They ran New York once a month. They ran Philly once a month. They ran Boston once a month, so on and so forth. There's a great website out there. Let me actually bring it up right here in case you want to go and look at it. Well, then wouldn't you know, I can't find it. Okay, here we go. I got it now. It's WWE PPV Results, and that's results with a Z at the end. I don't know why. It's not my website. I don't know why they did that. Weebly, WEEBLY.com. Great website. I actually get a lot of information from there. It gives you every single house show event that basically the WWE has ever run, especially during the 80s and 90s. They were really good about it. So if you want to take a look, you can go there, and it'll get you all these shows that we're looking at. But anyway, Brett chokes Ramon on the bottom rope while the refs turned around. Great work, going back and forth. The Hart Foundation uses double teams. Ramon does a sunset flip on Neidhart and gets over there and tags Brett. That was an interesting one. You don't see that. Danny Davis, of course, interferes. They make a hot tag that the ref didn't see, and Bret Hart runs into Neidhart. The Rougeaus they finally make the hot tag. Jacques makes a big comeback. Then you end up with all four men in the ring brawling around. The match basically ends on a ref distraction. Jacques has Bret in an inside cradle. Danny Davis rolls it over. Bret Hart gets to pinfall. Pretty good stuff here. Obviously, it builds something out of this. We'll see where it goes in the coming weeks between the Rougeaus and the Harts. Just a quick break in the action, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Instagram at Friday Evenings Undercard, on Twitter at FUndercard, on Facebook by going to facebook.com/Friday Evenings Undercard. You can reach us via email at fridayeveningsundercard@gmail.com. Please have a listen to our interviews with Ohio Valley Wrestling stars Tony Gunn, Sam Thompson, King's Ransom, and Callie. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us that 5-star review on iTunes. It'd mean a lot to us. Now, let's get you right back to the action. You go back. Now you're in the studio again. Gene Okerlund comes in. I've got a great little note here that he calls Bobby Heenan a jabroni. So if you're not a fan of old wrestling, I hate to break it to you, Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, was not the first person to call people jabronis. There was people doing it long before he did it. He popularized it more so, but he was definitely not the first. And if you follow the Iron Sheik on Twitter, he uses it a lot with some colorful words mixed into it. We then have an info segment with Demolition, and this is where basically it's announced that Mr. Fuji is going to be the manager for Demolition. And the main note that I have here is just how strange Axe looks with the black face paint. So obviously if you followed the product during this time, you're going to be way more used to Axe wearing the silver face paint. And so to see him in the black, it's really, really weird looking. After this, you go into another Ken Patera segment. This is something that they're building up. Obviously, we mentioned last week Patera is coming off, actually 2 weeks ago even. We missed last week. Apologies for that. The Ken Patera segment, they're trying to build him up after some time in jail. He talks about turning bad while he was working with Bobby Heenan. They're going to, build this up for the next 4 or 5 weeks as we go through this with Ken Patera, trying to blame Bobby Heenan for turning him bad and making him do all these bad things. And this promo does a great job sort of tying Ken Patera's work with Bobby Heenan to the jail time. The next match on the show, we end up with Demolition against the Killer Bees. This is back in the Maple Leaf Gardens, and this is March 15th of 1987. And it's the finals of the Frank Tunney Sr. Memorial Tag Team Tournament that we mentioned in previous episodes, where there was a couple of the matches were some of the preliminary matches of the tag team tournament. And so this one's the final, Demolition against the Killer Bees. Shouldn't really be a shocker how this one turns out. Demolition's made to look really, really strong because they're the new tag team, and I think already now, Vince is trying to build them up to be this huge tag team. I have a note, it's really weird. The Killer Bees are wearing Nike basketball shoes in the ring with like the high socks. It's just a really weird look. And another interesting one with this, even though we just got the segment where Mr. Fuji was announced as the manager for Demolition, you still have Johnny V in the corner. The match ends when the Bees go outside the ring. They put on the masks, and this was a standard finish for the Bees, and I don't understand how this is a face tactic and not a heel tactic, but anyway. They put on their masks, and they do the switcheroo. If you're a modern wrestling fan, this, you might call this twin magic, like the Bella Twins used to do. And so Demolition loses, but it was on an illegal switch, and then they basically beat up the Bees after the match. And that's that. Demolition comes out. They still look strong. The Bees get the win, so, the crowd pops. But Demolition still looks strong. They're still looking like a Hoss tag team. and everybody kind of wins. Now you come back out to the host table, and this fine Chinese food that Bobby Heenan was talking about. I mean, it's absolute corner store Chinese food in the the white containers and all that sort of stuff. And by the time they come back, basically it's all empty, and Monsoon doesn't have anything to eat. Heenan did break him out some kind of a food, but I don't remember what it was. I don't remember if it was like fried bananas or something like that. And there's two great Bobby Heenan lines, two lines that don't really age all that well. He goes, the crew came out here like buzzards, like they were going off to the chair. And you're just like, oh man, I don't know if that's all that good. You probably you couldn't get away with a reference to like a last meal for somebody on death row nowadays. And then he says they hit it like it was the Alamo. You might actually be able to get away with that line today as long as you weren't in Texas. Then they cut out of that. Then you go to a Don Morocco skit. I don't even have any notes on the Don Morocco skit, honestly. I just said it was as terrible as it's been. Yeah, man, I don't know. If you're turning into primetime wrestling to watch these Don Morocco skits, I can't. I got nothing for you, man. You get another match after that. Danny Davis against Coco Beware, March 16th of 87, London Gardens. And as best I can tell, this is Danny Davis's first singles match. I actually have my computer up here, so let me see if I can. Let me take a quick look at that. Let's see. So, yeah, as best I can tell, like I said, this is Danny Davis's first ever match. And, they may have actually mentioned that on commentary now that I remember it. Good back and forth. It does what it's supposed to do. It gets Davis some exposure to, like, the fans. Like, now they're able to see him. It ends up being a time limit draw, which is like really weird because it's a really weird time. And actually, now that I look a little deeper, maybe this wasn't Danny Davis's first match. That said, however, it was his first feud. Basically, he wrestled a handful of matches with Coco leading into WrestleMania 3. But so this one ends. It's a time limit draw, and I've seen various different things for how long it lasted. The time online says 16 minutes and 58 seconds. I counted something like 17 minutes and 40 seconds or something like that as far as what it was on the tape. Obviously, I can't see the match having a 17.5-minute time limit. I've never heard of anything like that. You're either going 15 or you're going 20. I can't see somebody being like, well, I want to go 15, but I want to go 20. Well, how about we meet in the middle and go 17.5? I can't see that. Basically, the way I see it here, they just missed the cues, or they got to going a little hot and they just rang the bell. Because it's not like what you would see in WCW during this time and even later into the 90s, where they would actually count it down over the PA system, where you would hear 3 minutes remaining, 2 minutes remaining, and you would count it down. Which, honestly, I think you should do. If you're going to have a time limit match, I think you should have a countdown. And, okay, Coco, he's a mid-card jobber. We've talked about him on the show before. He wins a lot of matches on television. He loses a lot of matches at house shows and at big events. And it gives him credibility. So Danny Davis being able to go to a draw with Coco Ware gives Danny Davis credibility as a wrestler. If Danny Davis was just going out and beating, some jobber, whoever, some no-name jobber, then who cares? But having him go against Coco immediately established him as legitimate talent. He's not beating Coco, but they're going to a time limit draw and they're doing it on television. And so that establishes Danny Davis as somebody who can be a legitimate competitor, especially once they get to the WrestleMania match. The next match on the card, and they join this one midway, and it's a women's match. Eric commented last time that they noted that this was a match that was taped a while back, but I didn't catch that. This match, now bear in mind, this taping is from the April 13th, 1987 episode of Primetime Wrestling. This match was taped in the Boston Gardens on June 22nd, 1985. So that'll give you an idea of how they, changed what was going on here. Because this is a match that's almost 2 years old, and they bring it out. Cool stuff. Desiree Peterson worked from underneath and then hit a high cross body for the win. Not a heck of a lot to say about the match. If you don't know these wrestlers, they were actually pretty well-known women's wrestlers during this time. They both were women's tag team champions. Oh gosh. I can't say things like that because, like Sasha Banks and Bayley, they're the first ever women's tag team champions in WWE. But, oh, man, never mind. There was a tag team championship, women's tag team championship in WWEF back in the 80s. And for whatever reason, they've just, forgotten about it. If the previous tag team champions weren't, how to say it, old by this point, because, hey, look, this was 30 years ago. If they were 30 years old, even if they were 25 years old back then, I mean, they're 55 years old. So they're aged, if you will. If there wasn't quite so much of a gap there, I think it would be fun for them to make like a video and just like bring out the belts and be like, who are you? Like, what's this championship you've got? We've had this championship for 30 years. I don't know what you're talking about. But obviously that would never happen. I said several years ago what they should have done was have Medusa, Alundra Blaze, come back with her women's championship and, talk to Beth Phoenix or whoever was the champion at the time and be like, what's that belt you're holding? I got this one. Nobody ever beat me for this belt. And that would have been something that could really draw money. But, they would never, I don't know. It's just weird that they wouldn't do something like that to sort of definitively close everything. But whatever. They just move on. It doesn't have to make any sense or anything else, and they just do it. Now you have the Macho Man against the Junkyard Dog. That's the next match on the card. Intercontinental Championship is on the line. I cut some jokes about the venue. Me and Eric did. We went back and forth. We'll get them in on another episode because I'm sure this is not the only match we're ever going to see that is taped at this venue. It's taped at the Houston Summit, November 26, 1986. This was the main event of the card, and it was actually a pretty good card. I do remember we actually read that off. Let me get to it. So, yeah, November 26, 1986. Most of these matches ended up being taped. Big building, big arena, great card. You get Dan Spivey going over Moondog Spot. Butch Reed with Slick going over Steve Gatorwolf. I have honestly never heard that name. Jake Roberts and Tito Santana went to a time limit draw at 17 minutes and 25 seconds. Same thing with the Coco Ware match. Did you just miss the time, or did they just say, hey, ring the bell? They just had to wait for a certain spot, and they said ring the bell. I don't know. That's what you ended up with. 17-25 to a draw. Dick Slater pinned Dino Bravo at 9 minutes and 54 seconds after reversing a figure four into a small package. I don't know if I've ever seen that. Tag team champions Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid defeated Nikita Volkov and the Iron Sheik in 12 minutes and 43 seconds. Let's just say Volkov and the Sheik were not going to win a match in Texas in 1986. It just wasn't going to happen. Mike Rotunda pinned Moondog Rex with an airplane spin. And then the main event. Randy Savage defeats the JYD via countout. It was actually a really weird countout, too, because they're both outside the ring. The dog's beating up on him, and the dog throws him back into the ring, which nowadays they would say it breaks the count or something. I guess it just depends on what day it is. But, they said he threw Savage back in at 9 and the ref counted 10 and the JYD's still on the outside. There was an interesting back and forth. Gorilla Monsoon tried to interview Liz as part of the show. And, obviously Savage got really angry at that. He's like snatching her away. He's getting right in Monsoon's face. And, crowd gets to go home happy because the Junkyard Dog chases them both out of the ring. Even though he lost, he still sort of came out on top. And, it was a kind of a dirty win anyway for Savage. It's not like he pinned the dog 1, 2, 3. And certainly Look, 1986, you're in Houston, Texas. You're down there in the old Mid-South wrestling territory. Probably anybody short of Hulk Hogan, you're going to have the Junkyard Dog working on top. That's actually probably why Hogan was not on this card, because down there, I would strongly suspect that JYD was going to be the bigger draw as opposed to Hogan, because it was the dog that was selling out the Superdome and all kinds of stuff like that. So definitely this time period, that's a big deal that the JYD's on the card down there in Houston, Texas. Even though, really by this time he's kind of degenerated from what he once was. He's not what he was in 82 and 83, even though he's not that old. But, is what it is. So overall, really good episode of Primetime Wrestling. You had 2 title matches. That's an interesting one. Obviously interesting during this time period to get title matches on TV. Intercontinental Championship was defended, Macho Man and JYD. We just talked about that. And the tag titles were defended with the Hart Foundation and the Rougeaus. And for sort of a long-term build, Demolition is still on the card. They're still being built up. They're still looking strong. They lost in sort of a bad decision. There was no mention of the tournament, and that seems weird because obviously you've got all the footage. I don't understand why you wouldn't put that out, on the film. It seems weird that they wouldn't do that. But they end up looking really strong. They get to the finals of this pretty big tag team tournament after they've only been working together for about 3 months, and it just works out good. They're made to look really strong. And, that pretty much brings this episode to an end. A couple of notes. If you've been following along, we have still not seen Hulk Hogan on the show. We had Hulk Hogan on WrestleMania 3, but Hulk Hogan has not had a TV appearance since WrestleMania 3. That was something very standard for this time period. That the champion he didn't make appearances on television, at least in WWE. And in other places it was a little different, but in WWEF, whatever, you just didn't see the champion on TV. If you wanted to see the champion, you had to take your, behind down to the arena and see him at the arena, and that was that. So, hey, with that brings the episode to a close. I'm glad you listened. I'm sorry we couldn't get the episode to you like we wanted, but like I say, the audio issues was terrible, and it's just not something that I want to put out. I appreciate you listening. We'll be back next week with a normal episode. It'll be me and Eric, and we'll be going over it. April 20th, 1987 episode. Appreciate you listening. Have a good day.